Good morning. Welcome to Lesson 7, the second half of Lesson 7 of the Siddur Unpacked. Today we'll be doing on Utterances and Offerings, Part 2. And if you have the textbook, this textbook, and again, it's available for sale if anybody wants to buy one for $40. I have more available. For those of you that are here and don't have a textbook, there should be plenty of them around. Yehuda, you want a textbook? Joyce, can you pass one to Yehuda, please? And one to Avram. There should be another one available right here. Avram, this one can be for you. So we're on page 88 in the textbook, and in the Siddur, which is the regular Kahat blue Siddur, we are on page 22. We're holding a paragraph that is called Ribon Ha'olamim. So 88 in the textbook, 22 in the Siddur, and today we are going to be continuing the conversation that we started last week. As a reminder, during this class, we pass around the mic. If you're reading, I ask you just to hold it to your close to your mouth, like that we can hear you, and those that are watching the recording or listening to it on Facebook can see the recording. So, last week we ended off after going through lots of study, in other words, braitas, from throughout the collection of braitas that talk about the sacrifices and the incense offering. Why? Because, as we said, uneshalma farim sifatenu, our lips pay our dues, or they make up for our lack of sacrifices. Ben Sion, you want to take this textbook? This one's available. And since we are going to pray instead of bringing sacrifices in the temple, so therefore we want to talk at least a little bit about what those sacrifices and what those incense offerings looked like. Once we conclude all that, we end off with a paragraph that begins with the words Ribon Ha'olamim. This is page 22, midway down, a paragraph that starts with Ribon Ha'olamim, or in English, Master of the World. Now, I want to explain something. Throughout, you've seen this last week, and you're going to see this again this week, as we finish up this whole section. Because we're talking about things that we don't do today, and more on that later, we'll talk about a spiritual way that we do it today, but at least, literally, we don't accomplish these things today. We don't bring sacrifices in the temple. We don't bring incense offerings on the altar. So we've been alternating. You may have noticed this until now. Before we started, we did this. In the middle, we did this. We're going to do it again now. We're going to do it again at the end of it. There's little mini prayers throughout where basically we pray to God saying, because of our sins, we don't have our temple. Because we are in exile, we don't have all of these services. And therefore, we pray that should come back. Okay? So, Ben Sion, if you could get us started on page 22 in the Siddur with the paragraph that starts with Ribon Ha'olamim, or in the English, Master of the Worlds.
So read in Hebrew or in English?
In English. And this, by the way, on a day that Tachanun is not said, we don't say this because it is, of course, beseeching and asking for something that happened as a result of our sins, which we don't do on a day that Tachanun is not said. Okay, go ahead.
Master of the worlds, you have commanded us to offer the daily sacrifice at its appointed time, and to burn the incense offering at its proper time, with the Kohanim officiating, Leviim chanting, and the Israelites attending the service. Now, through our sins, the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, the daily sacrifice and the incense offering are discontinued, and we have neither Kohen officiating, nor Levi chanting, nor Israelite attending the service. Therefore, may it be your will, Lord our God, and God of our fathers, the prayer of our lips be regarded and accepted by you, as if we had offered the daily sacrifice at its appointed time, attending its service, and burned the incense offering at its proper time. As it is said, we will render the prayer of our lips in place of the sacrifice of bullocks. And it is said, this is the law of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the consecration offering, and the sacrifice of the peace offering.
Thank you, Ben Sion. In other words, this is a prayer asking Hashem to bring back the temple so we can do this. So we can do this once again. And we quote that verse. You see it on the Shalma Farim Sifatenu. In the Hebrew, it's the third to last line, last word. In the English, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. The last few words. We will render the prayer of our lips in place of the sacrifice of bullock. So that's the theme that we're going with here. Okay, we continue now with Eizehu Mekoman, which is going to be more study about sacrifices. So the theme already is apparent why we're saying this, but there is something else going on here. What we are about to read here is a complete chapter from Tractate Zevachim, okay? It's chapter 5, and it's from the Mishnah, not from a Braita. Until now, all these little things we've been doing have been Braitas, but as you may remember, we're in the middle of, anybody remember this? We're in the middle of studying Torah as part of our daily regimen of studying Torah. You may remember that 5 lessons ago or so, we made a blessing on the study of Torah, one of the first things we did in the morning. And then we started right away by reading some verses from throughout Tanakh, and then doing a little bit of Mishnah we did. So now we're going to do a proper amount of Mishnah and a proper amount of Talmud. We're going to do that right now. Bottom of page 22 is Eizehu Mekoman, which is a complete chapter from Mishnah. And then when we get to page 25, we're going to do Rabbi Yishmael Omer. I know at the top it says Baraita. It's actually not a Baraita. It's from the Talmud, more specifically from Sifra. And we'll talk more about that when we get to it. But basically, we're going to conclude our regiment of study. Now, of course, we're going to study more throughout the day. But at least at the very basic, we did some reading of verses from the Torah. We did a full chapter of Mishnah and a full section of Talmud. Okay? Now, this section of Mishnah we choose, because that's what we're starting with here on the bottom of page 22, is actually chosen for a very, very unique reason. Besides the fact that it fits the theme, sacrifices, etc., it's chosen for a very unique reason. And that reason is because it is the only chapter from over 500 chapters, if I remember correctly, that the Mishnah has. Let me see if they have the number here. Hold on. No, it doesn't say how many. I don't know where I got that number from. Anyway, among the many, many, many chapters, however many chapters there are in the Mishnah, this is the only chapter in the entire Mishnah that does not have a disagreement. There's no machloket. There's no disagreement between two rabbis. This one says this way, this one says that way. So it's an appropriate Mishnah to learn before we start praying, because obviously we want to stress this idea of unity and agreement, etc. Okay? So we're on page 22. Now, what is the theme of this chapter? The theme of this chapter is that it introduces the categories of sacrifices. All right? So I'm going to go through it quickly. Actually, you know what? Let's take turns. You know what? Here's how we'll do it. I'll do the first Mishnah, or the first 3 Mishnahs, which is the first paragraph, starts at the bottom of page 22, goes through midway down page 23. I'll lay the groundwork so you understand what's going on here, and then Bob will ask you to read the next one, okay? So just hold with us right here. Bottom of page 22, the Mishnah starts off, Eizehu Mekoman shel Zavachim, where were the places of the sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash? In other words, we want to give you the answer to 5 questions with regards to every single sacrifice. Where was it brought in the temple? Because every sacrifice had a different location. When was it brought? Till when can it be eaten? And who can eat it? So that's 4 questions. Maybe there's a 5th question. I'm forgetting. Either way. Oh yeah, and where can it be eaten? Those are the 5 questions that we're going to answer about each sacrifice. Now, one of the most important things that we're going to learn is that it's going to depend on which sacrifice you're talking about. Not which sacrifice specifically, that too, but mainly which category of sacrifice you're talking about. So the first thing he says is, the most holy offerings, that's Kodshei Kadashim. And that's a category of sacrifices, were slaughtered on the north side of the altar. So he gives some examples. The bullock and the he-goat of Yom Kippur were slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Their blood was received on the north side in a service vessel and was to be sprinkled between the staves of the ark toward the curtain of the Holy of Holies and upon the golden altar. The omission of any one of these sprinklings invalidated the sacrifice. The Kohen poured out the rest of the blood at the western face of the outer altar. If, however, he failed to do so, it did not invalidate the sacrifice. Okay? So that was Mishnah number 1. An example of answering those questions with regards to one sacrifice. Where he slaughtered the animal, where he sprinkled the blood, where he collected the blood, where he poured the rest of the blood. I don't want to get into too much detail, but just to give you an idea, at the base of the altar there were 2 holes that were kind of these drains that ended up outside in a very specific place. All of these things, as you can imagine, are dictated in the Torah and in the Talmud and in the Mishnah in very specific manner. But just overall, you see how that works. Okay, now there's another category which he's about to introduce. One second. I believe he's about to introduce it right now, which is called Kadashim Kalim, light holy sacrifices. Not yet. He's going to introduce it soon. For now, he continues with the holy sacrifices. What is the next category? Number 2, about top of page 23. The bullocks and the he-goats which were to be burned were slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Their blood was received there in a service vessel and was to be sprinkled toward the curtain of the Holy of Holies and upon the golden altar. The omission of one of these sprinklings rendered the sacrifice invalid. The Kohen poured out the rest of the blood at the western base of the outer altar. If, however, he failed to do so, it did not invalidate the sacrifice. All these offerings were burnt at the place where the ashes were deposited. Okay, number 3. The sin offerings of the community and the individual, these are the communal sin offerings. The he-goats offered on Rosh Chodesh and on the festivals were slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Their blood was received there in a service vessel, and of this blood 4 sprinklings were to be made, one upon each of the 4 corners of the altar. How was this done? The Kohen went up the ramp, turned to up the ramp, that's the ramp of the altar, by the way, turned to the ledge bordering the altar. For those of you that are familiar, the altar was 3 stages. It started at the bottom of the base, it was called the Yesod, then it went up about 5 amot, then it went in, that was called the Soviv, and then it went in and went up another, I think, 3 amot, and then it went in again, and that was the top of the altar. So he was walking along the middle part. So think of him about 8 or 10 feet up in the air, okay? He's gone up the ramp, he's about 8 or 10 feet up in the air, and now he's crawling along on this 1 amma long catwalk, if you will, that went around the altar, and he's going to all 4 corners. And what's he going to do? He went up the ramp, turned to the ledge bordering the altar, and walked to the southeastern, northeastern, and northwestern and southwestern corners. Boom, 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 boom. He poured out the rest of the blood at the southern base of the altar. These offerings, prepared in any manner, were eaten within the courtyard of the sanctuary only by the male Kohanim on the same day and evening until midnight. So what you'll notice is this last part was able to be prepared in any manner. In other words, they could cook it or bake it or roast it or whatever it is, right? These leftover parts, not the parts that were brought on the altar and burnt up to God, but rather these parts that the Kohanim were able to eat. Who was able to eat it? Only male Kohanim. We'll soon see that some of them are males, some are male and female, etc. And only on the same day that the offering was brought, and only until midnight, and it had to be eaten within the courtyard of the sanctuary. Okay? Beautiful. You'll see that we're starting to get to lesser and lesser stringency as we go through the offerings. Okay, in this manner, we go through many offerings. Bob, if you can read for us, please, the next one. Ha'olah, number 4.
The burnt offering, a sacrifice of the most holy order, was slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Its blood was received, and there was a service vessel, in a service vessel, and of its blood 2 sprinklings were made at opposite corners of the altar, so as to constitute 4. This offering was to be flayed, dismembered, and totally consumed by fire.
Okay, and olah was it's a category of offering. It's not a specific offering, it's a category of offering. So for example, just give you the most common example, the morning offering and the evening offering. Remember we said every day started with a morning offering and ended with an evening offering? Those were olot. An olah means that it went completely up to God. Olah means to ascend. It went completely up to God. No parts were eaten, not by Kohanim, not by anybody else. Okay? So that's the ones he just read about. Okay? Michelle, if you can keep us going with number 5.
The communal peace offerings and guilt offerings. These are the guilt offerings of the guilt offerings for robbery. The guilt offering.
In other words, he's going through now the whole category of guilt offerings. When would somebody bring a guilt offering? So the first one is guilt offering for robbery. You want to guess when somebody would bring that? If they wanted to do teshuvah for robbery, they would bring a guilt offering for robbery. And there were different types for each one. Keep going. The guilt offering for...
The guilt offering for misusing sacred objects. The guilt offering for violating a betrothed handmaiden. The guilt offering of a Nazir who had become ritually unclean. The guilt offering of a leper after his purification.
You remember that one? That was yesterday's parasha?
Yes.
Okay, keep going.
The guilt offering of a person in doubt whether an act he had committed requires a sin offering.
So let's say, for example, somebody works on a certain day, and then they find out afterwards that they can't remember exactly what it's very possible that day was Shabbos. So now they're in doubt about whether they worked on Shabbos or not. They might bring an offering just in case. Go ahead.
All of these were slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Their blood was received there in a service vessel, and of their blood 2 sprinklings were to be made at opposite corners of the altar, so as to constitute 4.
So just to clarify, this is the second time he said this already. He sprinkled on the corner of the altar to constitute 4. That means he took his finger and he sprinkled the blood on the corners that it hit this side and that side. Let's say it was north and west, right? On both sides at the same time, and then on the other side as well, so that it went on all 4 sides of the altar. Keep going. These offerings
Prepared for food in any fashion were eaten within the courtyard of the sanctuary only by the male Kohanim on the same day and evening until midnight.
Okay. So this one has a little longer. It's the same day, not just till sunset, but the same day and until midnight of that evening. Number 6, Leticia, you want to go for us?
The thanksgiving offering and the ram offered by a Nazir at the termination of his vow were sacrifices of lesser sanctity. They might be slaughtered.
So that's the category I was talking about, which is called, you could see in the Hebrew, it's called Kadashin Kalim. That means the lighter sanctity. They're not kadashim, kache kadashim. They're not as stringent, but where they are, you're going to see very soon in the laws where it's a lot less stringent. Go ahead.
They might be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard of the Beit Hamikdash. Of their blood, 2 sprinklings were to be made.
Again, at opposite corners of the altar, and that way making 4.
So as to constitute 4. These offerings prepared for food in any fashion might be eaten anywhere in the city by anyone on the same day and evening until midnight. The same rule applied to the parts given to the Kohanim, except that they were to be eaten only by the Kohanim, their wives, their children, and their servants.
Okay, so these offerings already were able to be eaten by not just the Kohanim, but the Kohanim's families. Okay, by the way, this was a big portion of how the Kohanim actually supported themselves. Okay, number 7, let's keep going. Vicky.
The peace offerings were sacrifices of lesser sanctity. They might be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard of the Bet Hamikdash. Of their blood, 2 sprinklings were to be made at the opposite corners of the altar, so as to constitute 4. They might be eaten prepared for food in any fashion, anywhere in the city, by anyone during 2 days and 1 night. The same rule applied to the parts given to the Kohanim, except that they were to be eaten only by the Kohanim, their wives, their children, and their servants.
Okay.
Next time, wear my glasses.
So what was that?
Next time I got to wear my
That's
glasses.
okay. So I want to point out a couple things here. First of all, I hope most of you realize that these are a lot of categories and subcategories. So for example, the Thanksgiving offering, which is the one that Tisia read for us, actually had 4 different types of Thanksgiving offerings. I don't think there were variances in what happened with them. The laws were all the same for all of them, but it could have been brought for different types of situation in which a person would have needed to bring a Thanksgiving offering. This one that he mentioned the peace offering. It's called the peace offering, shlamim, because everybody got a part. That's where the name comes from. In other words, part of it went to the Mizbeach, to the altar for Hashem. Part of it went to the Kohanim. Part of it went to the owners who brought this offering. They would also get a piece and they would eat it. So what does this mean? Who was bringing it? So just to give you some examples, one of the shlamims was the Shalmei Simcha and the Shalmei Chagiga, which were brought each holiday. So you may have heard that every single Jew that went up to the temple in Jerusalem, right, brought a sacrifice with them. Anybody ever heard that before? That was a shlamim offering. That was a peace offering. So when they brought that sacrifice, they were bringing, let's say, a lamb, I think it was, or maybe it was a young bullock, I can't remember, whatever type of animal it was, they would bring it with them, or they would purchase one in Jerusalem. That was their choice. It was a very big business in Jerusalem, people to sell them there, massive markets like this. And they would bring it to Jerusalem. They would get it slaughtered. I can't remember if you could chip in with other people or not. The Pesach offering, for sure, they did have like groups. But for this one, I don't know if they did. And they would bring that in the temple as like a way of celebrating the holiday. And that was a way to celebrate the holiday for you, for the Kohen, the Kohen's family, and there were certain parts that went on the temple, that went on the altar in the temple that were burnt for God. Okay, always there was a portion was burnt on the temple, on the altar in the temple for God. Okay, let's keep going. Joyce, yes. Sorry, Vicky, go ahead.
Like if you,
The altar is in the courtyard. In the courtyard.
But how is that relative to where the kotel is, which we all know, the western wall?
So the kotel is a retaining wall. You may have heard,
right?
Which means the Beit Hamikdash. So the kotel is lower than the Temple Mount. You're not actually on the Temple Mount. Is everybody familiar with that? The kotel, essentially, you would be coming up towards the old city. You come into the old city of Jerusalem. You start coming towards the Temple Mount. So today we know it as going down. The reason you're going down is because you're going to the base of the mountain, right? For those that have been in Israel, you've been to the kotel, you're actually going down to the base of the mountain. When you get to the base of the mountain, you're seeing the kotel, which is the retaining wall, okay? Now, by the way, you're only going down slightly. You're already up when you drove into Jerusalem, but that's a separate point. Okay, the retaining wall means because the Beit HaMikdash was built on a mountain, they didn't just build a whole temple and then perch it on the top of the peak of the mountain and have it just balanced there, right? They had a retaining wall which was all the way around it. The kotel is one part of that. And then within that retaining wall, they built a ton of arches, okay, in order to flatten out the entire Temple Mount. And then on that section, they built the temple. Does that make sense? Everybody with me so far? All right. The temple itself, so let's say you would come up to the temple, all right? So hopefully none of you have ever been to the Temple Mount. A Jew shouldn't be going to the Temple Mount today. But if you have been, then you would go up. You would have to go up, either up that ramp that you see, which goes over the plaza, and you would eventually make it up to the Temple Mount. On the Temple Mount, on that flat section, obviously it was much bigger in those days, and there was a whole thing. There was something called the chel. The chel was like a perimeter that surrounded the whole thing. You would slowly approach. Eventually, you would get to the walls of the actual temple. When you walked in through the main doors of the temple, you would end up in what was known as the not the Azara. I'm not sure what that section was called. That's where the 4 lishkas were. So you would end up in this plaza where there were 4 chambers on each side. Each one had different things that were in it. Then you would go in through a set of doors. In other words, the temple was, so to speak, split in half by this wall, and there were these 15 steps that went up, which you might be familiar with in the pictures. And then you would go through a big set of doors and walk into the courtyard, the azara, and that's where the altar would be. The altar was massive. I want to say it was like 30 feet by 10 feet, or maybe 40 feet by 20 feet, something like that. Especially including the ramp. The ramp was on this side. The top of the altar was right here. Right behind that, no, not right behind it, but behind that was the entrance to the holy. Okay, that means to the heichal, to the actual building of the temple. Inside that building was where the menorah was, where the other smaller altar was where the shulchan was, the table with the showbread, lots of things like that. That was inside the building. Inside the Kodesh, there was a curtain, a tapestry that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Obviously, inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, was where the Ark was, the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of where we are. By the way, in that courtyard, right after this, we're going to take your question. In that courtyard, next to the Mizbeach, there were 24 slaughtering stations on the floor.
They could do so many.
Yeah, and that's how they could do so many. It was well, I'm not sure that you're right about that. It was actually for a shift system that they had, whatever. Right. We won't get into it, but there were 24. There were like these loops that they would put the head of the animal in and close it, and that's how they would slaughter it. And then there was like a table, and I think it was like a station basically where they would slaughter and then dismember the animal and then put it onto the altar. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that? Hopefully that gives you some more clarity.
So it's sort of over to the right when you're standing at the western wall. It's up and over is where we're not allowed to go.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Almost directly ahead of you. I think so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The 4 corners of the world for significant different what's the significance?
No, I don't think
Just
so.
like this
The
four
4 corners, yeah, the 4 corners of the world, yeah. Okay. Joyce, one more question. Yes, Michelle.
So, how many offerings a day were there? How many offerings?
That's a good question.
Constantly.
I don't fully understand it. My guess is hundreds. I would not be surprised to hear if it was over 1,000. It definitely depended on the day. But yeah. Okay, so that's that. It was a hub of activity, and it was not a clean place. I mean, I think that there were different sections of the Beit HaMikdash. Yeah. It was also a larger building, I think, than most people realize, because we get to see these little models, and we just think, oh yeah, look, the whole thing was like this. Yeah. But really, I mean, like there were multiple mikvahs on site, there were multiple storage rooms on site. There was like, I want to say it was probably a good 5-10 times the size of our Chabad property. You know what I mean? Like, it was like a massive operation with different sections, different wings, and it was like a campus. Like what we think of today as a campus, like when you go onto a campus, or like a college campus, for example, and it's like all different sorts of buildings with different sections and people running around from place to place. That's the impression I have in my head. Obviously, it looked very different than a college campus, and they were doing very different things than the college campus. But like, that's how big of a property it was. Okay, Joyce, the next one. Bottom of page 24, the offering of firstborn animals.
The offering of firstborn animals, the tithe of cattle, and the Pesach offering were also sacrifices of lesser sanctity. They might be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash. Their blood require only one sprinkling, but it has to be done over against the base of the altar. They differ in their consumption. The firstling might be eaten only by the Kohanim, while the tithe might be eaten by any person. Both the firstling and the tithe might be prepared for food in any fashion and eaten anywhere in the city during 2 days and 1 night. The Pesach offering, however, was to be eaten on that night only, and not later than midnight, nor could it be eaten except by those registered for it, nor could it be eaten except when roasted.
Okay, so at the end, basically, we get there some specific details. One for the Pesach offering, one for the Bechor, one for the tithe. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've never done it before, you've just completed a chapter of Mishnah. All right? So congratulations. We just studied an entire chapter of Mishnah. Obviously, if you were doing this with Talmud, you would be unpacking every single one of these Mishnahs. Oh, 1 second, what does it mean? And I gave you some of those details. What does it mean 2 constitutes 4, right? Like the way I explained it to you, that comes from the Talmud. And lots of things like that. What time is it, please? It is 10:32. Okay. Yes? Female. Their wives. The Kohanim had wives. They were all married. They were the Kohanim's wives. They didn't serve in the temple, but they were the Kohanim's wives. They had to be supported, and the Kohanim didn't have jobs. No, they had to be supported. No, the Kohanim's wives needed to eat and sleep and drink and have a roof over their heads, right? So these things, depending which sacrifice it was, either was able to be eaten only by the Kohen, or by the Kohen and his wife and their wives, or by the Kohen and his wife and his children, right? That's
The children are Kohanim, though, technically. I mean, they can't serve.
the boys are not Kohanim yet. No, not until they're bar mitzvah.
But I thought
You couldn't serve in the temple.
When you're born by your lineage, you can't serve in that position.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I know, but for the context of what she was asking about, that's it. That's it. Okay. Okay. So we finished off with the Mishnah. Now we're going to do some Gemara. Okay. In other words, some Talmud. Specifically, it's from the Sifra. What are we looking at here on page 25? What we're looking at is the 13 hermeneutic principles. Does that mean anything to anybody? To some of you? Okay. There is discussion in the Talmud about how exegesis works. Does the word exegesis mean something to anybody? Well, not just explanation, but exactly, inference. Yeah. So exegesis is the word usually used for biblical inference from text. So if you see a verse in the Torah, it's just a verse, and then from that you can extrapolate, oh, that means that we can only do this at this time, or that we're not allowed to do this on this day, or whatever it is, right? And you have to understand perfectly how it comes out of the text. Now, obviously, if you just tell somebody that, I have a wild imagination, and I'm pretty smart, so you give me a verse in the Torah, I'll learn whatever you want out of it. Like if you want to be able to eat pork, give me any verse in the Torah, I'll figure, oh, based on this and based on that, and look at the I mix up the letters, and that's it. I can eat pork, right? Doesn't work that way. There's no such freedom. There are 13 rules that these are the only ways that we. Now, obviously, there's a Masara, there's a tradition, the way it's passed down, generation to generation, etc. But there are also rules that are kind of the guiding principles, the walls that you bump into when you're trying to learn something out of a verse in the Torah, how that works. This Talmudic section on page 25, which is called Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Rabbi Yishmael is the one who teaches them to us. Are the 13 rules by which you can do so. I am not going to be explaining these 13 rules now. I will explain 2 of them, okay? And then I will just read them to you, all right? I will explain the first 2. The first one that's here is called a Kal V'chomer, okay? Kal V'chomer means lenient and stringent. If you hear about a law with regards to a lenient case, you can extrapolate with regards to that, that's for sure the case with regards to a stringent case. Okay, so for example, let's say the Torah tells you that you're not allowed to light a spark on Shabbos, you can infer from that you're definitely not allowed to light a fire, right? Because if you're not allowed to light a spark, you for sure cannot light a fire. That's called a Kal V'chomer. There's lots of ways to do that, there's lots of details to it, but that's one of the ways that inferring from a verse in the Torah other things that might be applied to that law. The next one is called a Gzeira Shava. Okay, in a Gzeira Shava, so you'll notice by the way that the translation is much longer than the Hebrew, and that's because they're trying to give you at least a sentence about a 2-word rule, which is done over and over and over again in the Talmud. They're giving you a sentence to kind of try and explain it. So let's go through the first one first in English, then we'll do the second one and I'll explain it to you. Rabbi Yishmael says the Torah is expounded by the means of 13 rules. Number 1, a conclusion drawn from a minor premise or more lenient condition to a major or more strict one, and vice versa. All right, that's the one I just explained to you, about the spark to the fire. All right, number 2 is called a Gzeira Shava. Let's read the English, then I'll explain it to you. An analogy between 2 laws established on the basis of identical expressions in the biblical text. Okay, so you have 2 times, the Torah is talking about 2 completely separate things. But both times it happens to be talking about a wall, right? Let's say with regards to the law of carrying on Shabbos, and the Torah tells you if there's a wall that surrounds it, okay? And then with regards to personal property, that your property ends because there's a wall that surrounds it. And the Torah happens to use the same words, a wall that surrounds it, the same 3-4 words in Hebrew and in English. I'm sorry, by the laws of personal property and the laws of Shabbat, right? Carrying on Shabbat. So you can infer from one to the other that the wall has to be identical. So let's say, for example, the Talmud will spend a long time understanding that when it comes to the laws of Shabbat, the wall has to be 10 tefachim high, 10 handbreadths high, and it needs to surround on 4 sides. Whatever laws apply there will apply there as well, because the Torah used the same terminology, so we can say, oh, that must mean the same thing. Everybody understand that? That's called Gzeira Shava. That's 2 out of 13. Let me run through the other 11 right now, and maybe one day we can give a full class on all 13 of these, but that time is not now. Number 3, a general principle derived from one biblical text or from 2 related biblical texts is applicable to all similar cases, though not specified in detail. Number 4, when a general rule is followed by an explicit particular, the rule is limited to the specified particular. Number 5, when that one, by the way, is easy to give an example for. So let's say it starts off with a rule: you're allowed to eat whatever, I don't know, or you're for a certain sacrifice. You have to bring an animal for a sacrifice. An animal is a general rule, right? And then in the next verse it says you should bring a bullock for the sacrifice. Obviously, it means a bullock. It doesn't mean an animal. It started off by an animal, but then it clarified what it means. What if it does the opposite? When a specification is followed by a general rule, so then we say all that is contained in the general rule applies. If it says a bullock, but then the next verse says an animal, it actually means any animal. Number 6, when a general rule is followed by a specification and then again by a general rule. So you have rule, specification, general rule. What's the law? The law is applicable only to such cases which are similar to the specification. So that creates kind of a subcategory. 7, when a general rule requires an explicit specification for the sake of clarity, the general rule is not limited to the specified particular, as in Rule 4. Similarly, when a specification requires a generalization for the sake of clarity, the generalization does not have the all-embracing effect, as in Rule 5. Number 8. So rule number 7 is really a clarification about rule number 4 and number 5. I'm going through it very quickly. If you're not following, that's fine. Number 8, when a particular case that is included in a general law is singled out to instruct us concerning something new, it is singled out not only to teach concerning its own case, but it is applied to the whole of the general law. Number 9, when a particular case that is included in a general law is singled out to add another provision similar to the general law, it is singled out in order to lessen but not to increase the severity of that provision. Number 10, when a particular case that is included in a general law is singled out to add another provision which is unlike the general provision, it is singled out in order in some aspects to lessen and in others to add to the severity of the provision. Number 11, when a particular case that is included in a general law is singled out with a new stipulation, the provisions of the general law no longer apply to it unless the Torah expressly states that they do. Number 12, the meaning of a passage may be deduced from its context or from a subsequent passage. Number 13, similarly, when two biblical passages contradict each other, the meaning can be determined by a third biblical text which reconciles them. Okay, these are the 13 rules. I get that none of you can probably repeat them all to me. Never mind, understand them all. It gives you a headache. Yes, let me explain something. The reason we say them every day is because really this is the type of thing that any self-respecting Talmudic scholar should know by heart. Should know all these rules because that's where they apply. Now, if you open up, let's say you finish your prayers, then you're going to go do your daily study of Talmud, half an hour. You're going to open up and start studying Talmud. Some people study 1 page of Talmud a day, for example. There's a good chance that in that daily regimen of Talmudic study, you're going to apply one of these rules. All right, and that's going to happen every single day. So that's why of all the Talmudic sections that we studied on a daily basis, this is the one they chose. And when you study it, you'll be able to reference it because you just said it that morning. I don't expect you to know all these 13 rules off the top of your head. I don't expect you to be able to give me examples of them. However, if you had studied even just 1 tractate of Talmud or 2 tractates of Talmud, you would be able to. Why? Because as you start going through it, you're using these on a constant basis. The entire Talmud is doing nothing more, nothing less than this. At least the halachic part of the Talmud. There's also the midrashic part of the Talmud, which is like stories and words of wisdom. That's obviously separate. But for the halachic part, it's only using this to learn out of verses in the Torah. Yes, Avram.
You know, already in Iran, you say, Gezerah has come. Gezerah it means a bad decree, is that right? But this doesn't
Not here. Gezerah doesn't mean a bad decree. Gezerah just means a decree.
Is a bad Gezerah come bad?
Exactly. Gezerah Ra'ah, it could also be Gezerah Tovah, right? Here it's Gezerah Shavah, which means that it's 2 similar decrees. It's a verse here and a verse which is using the same words. No, Shavah means equal, just means equal. So it's the same words being used here and there. There's no scale involved. Okay. That is the section of Talmud. And then yes, Michelle?
The source of this is the Talmud Rabbi Yishmael. This is where these 13 principles come from.
Yes, comes from Rabbi Yishmael in the Talmud, specifically in Sifra. At the bottom of page 25, you can see the number 1 where it says Sifra Introduction. That's where it comes from. Okay. At the bottom of page 25, usually here at Chabad we sing this. This is a prayer. It's a prayer, and you might not be surprised to learn that this is a prayer asking us to have the temple again so that we can do all these sacrifices, etc., again and again. Larry, if you can read for us, please. Yehi Ratzon in the Hebrew. May it be your will. I'm sorry, in the English.
I can read it in Hebrew.
Yeah, but please do it in the English. I'm sorry. You have the mic?
May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, that the Beit HaMikdash be speedily rebuilt in our days and grant us our portion in your Torah.
Okay, thank you. And we are now ready. 1 second. We are now ready to join together as a minyan. Okay, those last few words that we just said would usually be, like for example, this morning, Avram, who was our fantastic chazan, he started with those words. Today we didn't sing it, we were running a little late, but usually we would sing it, and then we would start as a minyan, we would start with Kaddish, which is why the next lesson is titled All Together Now, because that's when the minyan starts. Alex, you had a question? Thank you, Alex, for thanking Anna on our behalf. We appreciate that. Okay, so that will be lesson 7 as we continue. Alex, please.
All right, so the question
you have a question.
is this. All right, I've seen this bracha many times.
Yes,
Yep. Throughout my day, I see it. For this action to take place, do we need an Elijah and a Moshe?
Oh, you say for the rebuilding of the temple?
Yeah.
Yes, we need an Elijah to come first, and then for a Mashiach to come. Correct.
Shouldn't we say something?
This is like a prayer.
Shouldn't we acknowledge that needs to happen first?
Yeah, but that's not the text of this particular prayer. We do that in other prayers. Like in previous ones, even the one we studied today, when we said, Master of the Worlds, what do we ask for?
22?
Yeah. Over there we asked about that the Kohanim and the Levim and the Israelim should return to their service in the Beit HaMikdash. Each time there's a different type of text. That was on 22. There was another one we did on page 18 was another one. May be your will that you forgive us and the Beit HaMikdash should be rebuilt speedily in our days and we should be able to do everything as you told Moses. Sometimes we do mention Elijah and sometimes we do mention Mashiach by specific role, but these are all just prayers for Mashiach. Yes. That's okay, go ahead.
So in order for the temple to be built, we need a prophet, we need
Not a prophet. Elijah would have to come and blow the shofar and tell us the Mashiach is coming. And then Mashiach would not necessarily be the Kohen Gadol. I don't think, necessarily. He would be the king. Okay.
What else do we need? Besides those two.
That's a great question. Today's lesson is not about Mashiach.
I know, but
I have given courses about it, and we could do another course about Mashiach.
Evening class.
I was going to say, you're putting your foot in your mouth because there's always another course, and I actually have had in mind to start another one on the topic of Mashiach, which I do think is a good idea. And perhaps Alex will be the first one, maybe he'll be the sponsor of the course. It's only $5,000 for me to launch a course like that. And the good news is you have 5,001, so there will even be a leftover dollar for you. All right, okay, let's leave all that alone. Yes. This is the last question because then we have to wrap up the class.
How do you know sometimes they say Chasi Kadi, some way said the Rabban? Why do you do like this? Is there any reason for it?
That is the topic of next week's lesson. Next week we're going to talk all about Kaddish. So good question. He had a question about why there's different Kaddishes in different places. Next week we're going to start off by talking about Kaddish. It's the first part of next week's lesson, okay? If you take a look on page, in your textbook, if you take a look at, I guess it's page 97, it doesn't have a page number, you see where it says all together now. On the bottom left, they always say what's going to be covered in that lesson, and Kaddish is the one. See bottom left, right there? No, Vicky, you're on the right page. Bottom left, Kaddish. That's what's being discussed in next week's lesson. Okay. But we still need to wrap up today's lesson. And we usually try to wrap up with a deeper perspective about things. We have spent this week and last week talking all about sacrifices and incense offerings and all sorts of things that happen in the temple. But we don't have a temple. I get it. We yearn for the temple. Fine, no problem. But how am I supposed to relate to this whole idea here? Right? So it turns out we're not leaving you alone. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, thank you, Alex, said a Hasidic discourse in 1950. And we're only going to read a small portion of it, but it's all about a lot of it is about this topic, about how it turns out that bringing sacrifices has a spiritual version of that, which we do or should be doing every single day in our lives. Larry, you want to pass the mic to Yehuda? And Yehuda, if you can read for us, we're now in the textbook on page 93, lesson 7. Right, lesson 7, page 93, text 2, evil going up. I'm sorry, wrong text. Page 95 of lesson 7, text 4 is what he's going to be reading for us, please. A heavenly fire.
The English, right?
The English, please, yes. In physical sacrifice.
In physical sacrifice, we brought an animal up to the altar, and there was a heavenly fire, which the Zohar called the lion that consumes sacrifices, which engulfed the sacrifice. Similarly, in one's own personal service, each person has a heavenly fire, which is the fiery passion for God that is in the godly soul. As the verse states, its embers
are fiery.
Its embers are fiery, a godly flame. This is in the.
It is in this fire.
It is in this fire that we sacrifice our personal animal, which is the animalistic soul, so that the animalistic soul too can have a fiery passion for God. As the verse states, Deuteronomy 6:5, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, which our sages interpret to mean with both soul, meaning that the animalistic soul must also love God. How is this accomplished?
Keep going, page 96.
By the godly soul investing itself in the animalistic soul. On its own, the animalistic soul knows nothing about godliness. But when the godly soul invests itself in its counterpart, which is accomplished by a person contemplating godliness in a way that even the animalistic soul can understand and appreciate, eventually the animalistic soul will become consumed by a fiery passion for God, and the person can harness its brute power for spiritual pursuits.
Okay. What is going on here? I think some of you have studied Hasidus before, so you're probably aware of this on a general basis. Every single one of us has a godly soul and an animal soul. And the Alter Rebbe talks about this at length in Tanya. The animal soul and the godly soul, if you want to give them words, they would not be good and evil. That's not the way to categorize them. The way to categorize them is selfish and selfless. The godly and selfless. Selfish and selfless. The godly soul is selfless. All it wants is to be there for others, to be there for God, to be there for the harmony of the world, etc. That's everything it wants to do is for others. Now, do you think you can survive with only a selfless soul? Anybody? Let's talk about some things that you need to do every day in order to survive. Anybody? You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to breathe. Forget charity, hold on. To physically to survive, not to spiritually survive. Eat, sleep, procreate, all these things, right? These are all physical things, selfish acts that are self-survival, right? That comes from the animal soul, not from the godly soul. So the godly soul, it takes care of all the selfless acts, and the animal soul takes care of all the selfish acts. That's what drives everything we do in our lives. Now, the problem with the animal soul and why we call it animalistic is because it's self-preservationalist. Is that the word? Self-preservationalist by nature. So, if there's only if there's only a little bit of eggs left, and me and Michelle are both rushing towards it, if I'm only listening to my animal soul, I'm going to want to self-preserve, and I'm going to go run and grab the eggs and not let her have them. It's only the godly soul that tells me, even like when we're just doing it for manners, right? It's only the godly soul that tells me, oh, hold on. Oh, let's both have some. Let's each have some, right? Let's both survive. Now, the reason this is so important is because in this case, the fire on the altar in the temple is representative of the godly soul, the peace of God that you have inside of you. And it's important for us to remember that the godly soul has to consume the animal soul. In other words, our animalistic desires need to be tamed and need to be harnessed and need to be channeled by the godly soul to see where they go. So if you want to bring a sacrifice, if you wake up one morning and you're reading up until page 27, as we have done in the first 8 lessons of our class, and you say to yourself, God, I wish I could bring a sacrifice. Turns out you can. During your davening, after your davening, throughout your day, if you can channel your animalistic desires with your godly soul, to be harnessed and channeled in the right direction towards godly purposes and godly reasons, then you, in fact, have just then brought a sacrifice. And we have to bring many sacrifices throughout our day and many incense offerings, etc., and have them all be consumed by the godly fire that we have inside each and every one of us, which is our neshama. With this, we will conclude lesson 7, or really lesson 8, but the second half of lesson 7 of our weekly class, the Siddur Unpacked. I hope to see you all next week, God willing. Same time, same place. I know it's Mother's Day, but we will still have the class. If you need to see it on Facebook, you can do so. If not, you can join us here in person. I will expect a smaller crowd. Thank you all for joining us.
Is this the place where you...